That's it. Okay. All the years I've sat up here and I can still never remember which one of these buttons is the one that turns on the microphone, would you believe? Okay, so again, welcome to everyone here to the Planning Committee this afternoon. And can I particularly welcome members of the public who joined us in the public gallery. You're more than welcome. Of course you are. And relatively short agenda, but then again, as I always say, always beware of the short agenda because it's sometimes never as short as you think it might be. But we have a number of planning applications for decision this afternoon, members. So I won't delay the proceedings any further. I will ask the head of planning to give us a notice of summons of meeting and of course record members' attendance and any apologies that may be proffered. So Suzanne, if I can pass it over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Members, you're hereby summoned to attend the special meeting of the Planning Committee, which will be a hybrid meeting conducted remotely via WebEx and physically in the Council Chamber, Guildhall, Derry on Wednesday the 18th of June at 2 p.m. Move to the attendance. Alderman Keith Kerrigan.
Online, Suzanne.
Thank you. Alderman Neri McMorris. Here. Thank you. Alderman Janice. Here, Suzanne. Thank you. Councillor John Boyle. Thank you. Councillor Caroline Devine. Sure. Thank you. Councillor Sean Fleming.
And Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Gallagher.
And Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Conor Heaney.
Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Christopher Jackson.
Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Fergal Leonard.
Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Patricia Logue. Councillor Patrick Murphy.
Shaw.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Riley. And Councillor Steno Barr. Apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. We'll move on to the statement for remote meetings, and I would like to remind everyone physically present at this meeting or in attendance remotely that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. And this broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. And due to your attendance at this meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of these images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purposes of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are, of course, reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility in inverted commas, which is highlighted in the opportunity for you to speak. So there's a chat facility online, and a copy of the council privity note will be found on the council website, derrystrabane.com, etc. Members, moving straight forward and on to item number 4. Are there any declarations of interest in relation to the business of today's meeting? Alderman Montgomery.
Thank you, Chair. It is application LA11/23/2270/F as a board member on the Locks Agency.
Thank you, Alderman Montgomery. And when we come around to that, obviously, you know what the setup is. After that, you'll have to withdraw from the meeting. And moving on to chairperson's business, I don't have any personal chairperson's business. It's not really my habit anyway. So I will pass directly across to the head of planning. Suzanne, if you would want to walk members through the various items that we have got to discuss today.
Thanks, Chair. Members, we have 6 items of lead information for your attention today, which have been sent to you. We have a number relating to LA11/2023-2189F and LA11/2023-2190. We have a letter from the date of the 13th of June from the estate agent, a letter dated the 17th of June. We have information from Ulster University. We have an email exchange from Hugo Campbell and Alan Boyle. We have an email exchange from the planning team and Ulster University verifying the letters and the information that has been submitted by the agent team. Then in relation to item 4, the retention change use of 11 Aberfoyle Terrace. We have an email just in this afternoon at 12:15 from the applicant, Mr. Steve Bradley. The case officers will address all the lead information in the presentations today, members. We've also received a request, members, in relation to items 2 and 3 that the agent would like those pushed back to the end of the meeting in order to be able to join remotely to address the committee. So the chair is happy to facilitate that request today. And the running order then will be 1, 4, 5, 6, 2 and 3.
Okay, members, so basically, the agent for 2 and 3 has requested that that's moved to the end of the meeting. I'm happy enough with that. If you're all content with that, we'll do that. So just to repeat, the running order is 1, 4, 5, 6, 2 and 3. Okay, so everybody happy enough? Yeah. Bear with me.
Members, also just to make, obviously you'll be aware, you will have all been receiving correspondence regarding regionally significant application being dealt with by the Department of Infrastructure, SPD 2025-0011F. Just to advise you that officers will be pulling together all those emails, and we will also be copying those to the Department of Infrastructure for information at this stage. The council has received a consultation on the environmental statement accompanying that application, and officers will be bringing a paper into Planning Committee on the 2nd of July with that being considered in a proposed response, and we can consider the matters further then. Thank you.
Okay, and just one further point on that. My predecessor as chair of the committee was Councillor Leonard, and it would appear that they all went through your email address, Councillor Leonard. So if you're content, if you want to forward all, I mean, there were quite a significant number of them. Might take you a wee bit of time, but it would obviously save officers time if we weren't all sending the same emails. So are you content to do that, Councillor Leonard? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it, actually, because as I said, there were quite a few. And if you start multiplying them up by 14, that becomes a hell of a lot more than just quite a few, doesn't it? So, Councillor Leonard, you're happy enough to take that. That'll do. Thank you, and I appreciate you doing that too as well. Okay, members. So we'll move on, and we will go to the first application, which is LA 11 2023 2270. Pardon me. Forgot myself there, folks. Yes, you do. Of course you do. You have late information, so we'll take 5 minutes for you to have a look through the late information, and then we'll start off with the first application, if that's all right. Okay, thank you. Are you all content to proceed? Yeah. Okay, so we will go to our decision, and it's item number 1, which is LA 11/2023-2270/F, and I'll invite Malachy to present the officer report. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Item 1, LA 11/2023-2270 is a full application for the provision of a new 2.5-storey dwelling with associated hard and soft landscaping works. The site is located at Ballygowan Road, 100 metres to the south of Eglinton Health Centre, which is on Main Street, Eglinton, and the recommendation is to approve. So the application site is outlined in red in the application pack, is a cutout from a larger existing field which is accessed off the Ballygowan Road. The application site is located within the development limits of Eglinton in accordance with the area plan designation. The field itself will access off the Ballygowan Road as shown in the proposed block plan. The site is 100 metres south of an existing Eglinton Medical Centre, which has an access onto the main street in Eglinton. There are a number of existing detached single residential properties accessing off Ballygowan Road, and also across the road there's an existing residential development known as Grandchester Park and Granston Park. And run along the west boundary of the larger field on the area outlined in blue in your application pack. Where the cursor is shown here is the Castle River. And to the south of the site, there's an R field which is separated by an existing hedgerow. And there's a number of mature trees run along the Ballygowan Road, which are material in the consideration of the application. And there's an existing hedgerow, mainly hawthorn, going along the Ballygowan Road also. So just to give you an idea of the setting of the site, it's located beyond those mature trees. The actual field itself it's quite flat, but it falls away towards the Ballygowan Road. The application site is in a more elevated part of the site towards the north of the existing larger field. So the proposed development is described as a 2.5-storey dwelling, detached dwelling with a small attached annex to the side. This is the proposed elevations front and rear. And the proposed floor plans are set out also within your pack. And again, you can see that there's an attic element as well. So in terms of policy assessment, in terms of its application, the policy context includes the retained planning policies during the interim period. So the retained planning policies include the Dairy Area Plan, the Strategic Plan Policy Statement for Northern Ireland, as well as the relevant PPS statements relating to specific planning matters such as access, movement and parking, planning, archaeology and the built environment, quality residential environments, safeguarding existing residential areas, housing and settlements, and flood planning and flood risk. As we move towards adoption of the LDP, the weighting of the LDP means that it will be given determinant weight. So in this proposed application, we've also considered the relevant policies within the Residence Strabane Local Development Plan, Draft Plan Strategy 2032. These are all still set out in your pack, but there's a number of relevant policies, again, dealing with general planning matters and general planning policy, and dealing with quality residential environments, transport issues, archaeology, natural heritage and flooding issues. We've consulted a number of bodies in relation to the plan application, and the detail of those responses are contained in the pack. We've consulted NA Water, who have no objections. DFA Road, no objections subject to standard conditions. Environmental Health, no objections subject to informatives. Historic Environment Division, both the monuments and historic buildings section have no objections, subject to conditions relating to archaeology. Natural Environment Division have no objections, subject to standard informatives. Locks Agency have no objections, subject to standard informatives. We've consulted Shared Environmental Services in order to assess whether a habitats regulation assessment is required. And they've advised that there's a sufficient buffer between the site and any nearby watercourse. There's no conceivable effect on any European site has been identified, therefore further assessment is not necessary. And we've also consulted DFA Rivers, who have no objections in principle in terms of the submissions and the flood risk assessment, and we will consider the planning issues in relation to the DFA Rivers response later on in the report. There have been a number of representations, both in favour and against the proposed development. There have been 14 letters, a petition, a letter from concerned residents, and a letter of support. And 11 of these letters are anonymous. The letter of support considered the applicant has taken all reasonable measures to mitigate flood risks. In terms of the objections, the flood risk issues have been raised in relation to modelling, climate change scenario, the exceptions within policies, impediments to overland flow, surface water, increase of risk elsewhere, history of flooding, and proper flood management, and also some issues were raised in relation to neighbour notification. All of these matters have been considered and addressed within the case officer report. So in terms of the policy consideration of the proposed development, the principle of a dwelling house is acceptable on the basis that the site is located within unzoned land inside the settlement limits of Eglinton as defined in the Derry Area Plan 2011, subject to compliance with all our relevant planning policies. In support of the application, we've received a tree survey report, a biodiversity checklist, a flood risk assessment, and a drainage assessment. The layout has taken into account a number of matters, including a tree that's protected under a tree preservation order. And we've also had submissions in relation to the access, flood risk, and impacts on any neighbouring properties in the area. So in terms of policy consideration, within the draft plan strategy, there's general development management policy known as GDPOL 1, which all plan applications will have to take into account going forward. This policy covers a number of matters under a number of criteria, including impact on residential amenity, storage of bins, the use of sustainable earnest drainage systems or SUDs, use of renewable low carbon technology, measures for carbon offsetting, and the need to meet with all our relevant policies, including the Natural Environment Chapter, the Historic Environment Chapter, Transport Chapter, and the Coastal Chapters of the LDP. You also have to consider impacts on human health, consideration of impacts of the development in relation to vermin, litter, or birds, consideration of whether the proposed development will use non-main sewage disposal, and whether there's any net loss of biodiversity or risk from major accidents. Case officer has considered all of these issues within the report, and they're detailed. There's no view, in our view, there's no evidence of demonstrable harm arising from the development in relation to matters such as residential amenity. There's no issues in relation to any of the other chapters in consultation with the relevant bodies. And we believe that all the other relevant policy criteria have been addressed in the proposal. So in relation to the proposed land use, it's a proposed residential property, as already alluded to, it's within the development ones. So the principle of residential is acceptable at this location. So therefore, we've considered that the detailed policies contained within policy QD1 of the retained PPS 7 policy, as well as the emerging HOW 8 policy, which is known as Quality and New Residential Developments, and the draft plan strategy. And we've also considered another policy called GDPOL 2, which is design policy within settlements. So these policies in general, in summary, will cover a number of matters, and officers considered the impact of the proposed development in terms of its design, character, It's the provision of its open space or amenity space, impact on heritage assets, impact on natural heritage features, impact on road safety and movement patterns, impact on residential amenity, provision of neighbourhood facilities, and whether the proposed design is secure from crime, whether it is considered the use of subs, and whether there will be a net loss of biodiversity. So the proposed attached dwelling, the layout, footprint and orientation of the dwelling is considered to be acceptable, and the scale and massing of the dwelling proposed is appropriate and proportionate to the character and topography of the site and the surrounding area. There will be no adverse impact on heritage assets or natural heritage features. There was a TPO tree on site, which is being considered, and it will be retained and protected during construction. And this can be enforced through a condition. The access is adequate and can be provided, and it will not impact on road safety. There's adequate provision on the site to allow non-motorised users access the site from the nearby village. There's no requirement for neighbourhood facilities given the size of the development, and the design of the proposal is considered deterrence of crime. There'll be no impacts on residential amenity of any nearby properties. The proposed development has incorporated sols within the driveway and soft landscaping areas within the design, and there's been no evidence that the proposed development will result in any net loss of biodiversity. Further to QD1 and HOY8, there's another policy from PPS7 and the LDP which asks decision makers to consider the impact of the proposed development in terms of safeguarding the character of the established residential area. It is considered that this is within an established residential area, albeit there's other uses, including commercial uses along Main Street. So we have considered the nearby character in terms of the residential character in terms of its density, size and siting, and are satisfied that the proposed development reflects the pattern of development within this part of Eglinton. And we've also satisfied it can meet the space standards set out in Annex A of the addendum to PPS 7. And we've considered HOY 11 within the draft plan strategy, which is effectively the same policy requirement as PPS 7 addendum. The proposed property is so proposed developments located within Eglinton, which is a historic village. Therefore, we've consulted the Historic Environment Division in terms of both assessing the application in terms of its impact on archaeology, and also in terms of assessing on any nearby listed buildings within the village. In doing so, we've consulted the statutory body, HED, who've advised us they have no objections and either to the impact on listed buildings or monuments subject to a standard condition. Therefore, we're satisfied at SPPS, PPS 6, and the heritage policies within the new plan have been complied with. Impacts on natural heritage have also been considered in terms of the application. There was some supporting information submitted with the application. There was no priority species were identified or confirmed on the site. Shared environmental services were consulted, and they've advised that there's sufficient buffer between the site and the watercourse, and that would attenuate any release of any pollutants during construction. And Lochs Agency noted the request for various conditions by Rivers Agency and supports these to ensure that there's no impacts on the aquatic environment. Tree T4 is the tree that we sought to protect. Is located in close proximity to the access, and will not be adversely impacted as the existing levels are being retained, and a geocell tree root protection system will be installed to protect the roots. The access and driveway will be finished in permeable surface. The trees will be protected from appropriate fencing prior to works commencing by way of condition. In terms of any removal of hedgerow to provide a safe access onto Ballygordon Road, officers considered there be approximately 10 to 15 metres of vegetation will have to be removed to provide the access, but this will be compensated in terms of a replacement hedgerow, which again will be conditioned subject to any approval of the application. The other two mature trees on the roadside boundary have moderate moderate bacterial potential due to presence of thick layered lattice ivy on the main trunks and larger stems. These will be retained and conditioned as part of the development, and therefore there's no requirement for further bat surveying subject to these trees being retained. Therefore, in summary, having considered all the potential impacts on natural heritage and considered the policy requirements from the SPPS and PPS2, as well as the policies within the draft plan strategy, we're satisfied that there'll be no adverse impact in terms of impacts on natural environment from this proposed development. We've also considered how the proposed development will dispose of sewage, and we've been informed that on the P1 form that they'll be availing of the main sewer. NI Water have no objections and have provided advice which can be attached as an affirmative to any approval. In terms of the access onto the site, we've consulted the statutory consultee DFA Roads, who have no objections. They're satisfied that a vehicular access can be created on the Ballygordan Road with visibility displays of 2 by 30, and that can be conditioned and complied with. Therefore, officers are satisfied that the policies within PPS3 and the draft plan strategy related to transport have been adequately addressed by the applicant. The site itself is located within Eglinton, and we're all aware that there's historic issues in relation to flooding within the village emanating from the Castle River, and the constraint in relation to flooding has been identified. Therefore, we've consulted DFA Rivers, and there's the policy considerations set out in PPS 15, the retain policy, the SPPS, and the emerging LDP are all material in relation to this planning application. So in terms of the PPS 15 and the SPPS, policy FLD1 advises to take into account the 1-on-100-year fluvial floodplain. So the most up-to-date version of the flood maps indicates the vast majority of the site, as outlined in red, is outside the 1-on-100-year fluvial floodplain, including the dwelling and the parking area. The 1-on-100-year fluvial floodplain does encroach on the periphery of the site and in a small parcel within a small patch within the site. Rivers have requested the access to the site and the gardens and affected zones will remain at existing levels. That's, they say, no land raising on these zones, and the proposed dwelling finished floor level of 13.79 is included as a condition, and that the potential flooded area is protected from impediments likely to impede the flow of water, including landscaping, walls, impermeable fences, and land raising, or any future developments by way of a planning condition. A planning condition has been put forward by DFA Rivers and is considered acceptable by officers. And in addition to that, officers have recommended that a condition is put on in relation to removal of permitted development rights that may allow any of those types of structures or to be constructed without planning permission. We've also considered FLD2, which is the protection of flood defence and drainage infrastructure. There are no water courses under the terms of the drainage order within or bounding the site. And again, within relation to PPS 15 FLD1, that we received an updated flood maps from DFA Rivers in February 2025, which confirmed that the majority of the site is outside the 1-in-100-year fluvial floodplain. You just see here, that's the image before you, that's also within the pack, and you can see the small patches that are referred to in the report. It is acknowledged by DFA Rivers that the flood maps do not show floodplains with depths less than 25 millimeters. Floodplains at this depth, the policy is applicable. But they have acknowledged that the central portion of the site, mainly the area where the proposed driveway leads up to the house, there's water will convey through that site at those lower levels. And therefore, that's the sort of emphasizes the importance of the conditions as recommended by DFA Rivers. So that's this below the red star here, this is a flow path of that below 25 millimeters floodplain. So in considering FLD1, officers have acknowledged the consultation response and also the submitted flood risk assessment and consideration of their recommendation. We've acknowledged that the following mitigation measures address the issues raised by DFA Rivers, that the dwelling itself will be located outside the flow path emanating from the Castle River to position to the northern part of the site, and therefore outside the protected area. And there was originally a garage which has now been removed from the layout. We acknowledge that the existing levels of access and gardens remain to ensure that the development is out of the fluvial flood risk zone, and there's no increase in flood risk from development to elsewhere, and this can be dealt with by condition. Rivers recommends that the flooded area is protected from impediments, and again, this can be dealt with by condition. Rivers recommend the finished floor level, which again will be conditioned. And Rivers noted the proposal result in intensification of use with access to and from the development. So basically they're saying during extreme weather conditions that there may be limited access to the dwelling. So an informative will be added in that respect. So in summary, in consideration of FLD1, the count has been taken up the profile increase of the updated flood maps of February 25. And it's acknowledged that the house is outside the floodplain and that the site and gardens will remain at existing levels with no land raising. And therefore, in respect of that policy, officers are satisfied that all matters have been considered. Within the consultation response with respect of FLD1, Rivers have also advised in terms of the 1 in 100 year plus climate change fluvial flood extents. Respect of PFAS 15, these are not within the policy, but they're acknowledged, and so it's the darker blue areas, superseded floodplain extents are shown in respect of the climate change fluvial floodplain. So Rivers have advised that officers need to consider the exceptions test in relation to climate change in respect of FLD1. However, the exceptions test isn't available for consideration under PPS 15 FLD1, and officers believe that therefore that the actual area potentially affected by flooding is a minor development, and the mitigation measures will be adequate to address any potential flooding through that potential area. Moving on to the local plan draft strategy FLD1, which does, in one respect, change the policy emphasis, and it does give more definite direction for officers and decision makers to take into account the climate change scenario, and in particular take into account the 1 in 100 year fluvial floodplain plus climate change allowance. In doing so, the local draft plan strategy does introduce an exceptions test for any developments that would fall within such a definition. Given that the proposed development does fall within a definition, officers have considered whether the proposed development meets any of the exceptions within the local draft plan strategy FLD1 exceptions list. Officers do not consider that it meets any of the defined definitions within FLD1 in the draft plan strategy, but officers do consider that in this scenario there are material considerations that can be brought into consideration in accordance with Section 6(4) of the Planning Act. In this case, officers have given weight to a number of determined matters that would justify setting aside the requirement of applying FLD1 fully. In this respect, officers considered the main part of the development, i.e. the new dwelling, is located outside the climate change floodplain. The climate change floodplain will be across a garden area and the proposed driveway. Again, similar to the FLD1 consideration, if these are conditioned to remain at the same level, Officers are of the view that there be no other adverse impacts such as blocking flood flow paths or increasing flood risk elsewhere. Therefore, the evidential context is such that despite not technically meeting an exceptions test, there be no demonstrable harm in terms of increasing flood risk for the applicant or for anyone else outside the application, provided the mitigation measures and conditions are applied and adhered to. We've also considered FLD3, which relates to drainage and surface water, and a drainage assessment has been submitted in support of the application. And again, it recommended the use of permeable surfaces, and again, known as SOD solutions for the access and parking areas. The proposed drawings confirm the levels in these areas will remain the same and will therefore have no impact in terms of pushing floodwaters elsewhere. And therefore, officers are satisfied that the drainage assessment and its recommendations in terms of the provision of the permeable surfaces will ensure that there will be no adverse impacts in terms of drainage, and that the proposal is compliant with FLD3. FLD2 and 4 have also been considered within the new plan. And again, there's no issues in relation to these policies. One of the issues that was raised through the DFA Rivers consultation response is that in the earlier response, there was a note relating to the DFA Rivers advising that there was a development of a flood alleviation scheme by DFA Rivers Directorate for Eglinton, and this remains ongoing. As part of an earlier Rivers Directorate study, there was a recommended that there would be a construction of a flood wall within the application site, and there was a consultation response alluding to this earlier study. So we've reconsulted DFA Rivers since the application was deferred in April, and DFA Rivers have considered the issues raised by members at the previous meeting in April, and subsequent to the responses, Rivers have advised they've commenced a wider ranging review to explore flooding from various sources in the Eglinton area, with the aim of exploring more holistic options for a potential flood alleviation scheme. They've confirmed that there's no proposals for a flood alleviation scheme to mitigate the flood risk within Eglinton. And they've also confirmed that there is no legal status in terms of any such studies or proposals that have been carried out thus far. Therefore, officers are considered, in the absence of a confirmed flood alleviation scheme that's gone through statutory measures and has been considered, that we can't give significant weight to the possibility of a study that may recommend the construction of a flood wall within the site, on the basis that this may be one of many options and the wider range in review by DFA Rivers. So in conclusion, taking account of PPS 15 and the local draft plan strategy, the proposed mitigation measures proposed will ensure that the proposal will not cause demonstrable harm in respect of flooding, and is therefore in accordance with SPPS, PPS 15, and the draft plan strategy. Overall, having considered the relevant material plan considerations, including objections, consultation responses, and third-party comments, approval is recommended, subject to the conditions set out in the case officer report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malachy. Okay, members, we have a couple of speakers. So can I first invite Gillian Simpson to come forward? Apologies, Gillian, I didn't realize you were online there. Okay, Gillian, so you've got in and around 5 minutes to address the committee if you want to take the time now, and I'm sure we'll be happy to hear from you. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Gillian. I am a resident of Eglinton and I speak on behalf of fellow residents affected by the floods of 2017 and 2022. We strongly object to this planning application due to flood risk concerns and non-compliance with planning policy and are at a loss as to why this application is being recommended for approval. The opening line of the flood planning policy in the LDP states, Council will not permit development within the 1 in the 100 year fluvial floodplain plus climate change allowance unless the applicant can demonstrate the proposal constitutes an exception to the policy. On page 27 of your pack, take a look at the climate change floodplain on figure 16 of the officer's report. It clearly illustrates the development as defined by the red line is within the climate change floodplain. Halfway down on page 28, the report states the proposed development does not meet any of the exceptions set out in FLD1 of the new LDP. This application should therefore be refused on the grounds that the development lies within the climate change floodplain and fails to meet the exceptions test. DFI Rivers have advised on 4 occasions that unless an exception under FLD1 applies, the proposal is incompatible with the overall aim and thrust of the regional strategic planning policy in relation to flood risk, and that this should be considered as a material consideration. This field is not only a natural floodplain, but as confirmed by Neil at DFI Rivers on the 11th of October, and again at the previous committee meeting, it is a preferred option site for the future flood alleviation scheme in Eglinton. Many homes currently at risk would benefit from this scheme. Likewise, many would be disadvantaged if this development proceeds and that option is restricted or lost. While DFI confirmed on the 7th of May that the scheme does not yet have legal status, it doesn't mean it carries no weight. It is a material consideration, and the fact that this land is under review for strategic flood defence should weigh heavily against development. The officer's report in page 28 seeks to justify setting aside full compliance with the planning policies presented and presents a fragmented analysis and relies on conditions rather than proper policy application. Section 6.4 of the Planning Act states, where in making any determination under this Act, regard is to be had to the local development plan, and the determination must be made in accordance with that plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. This means the development plan should take precedence overriding material considerations. Such considerations must be significant enough to depart from the policies of the LDP. The officer's report cites as material considerations that the dwelling itself is outside the climate change floodplain, but it is sitting in an island. It is completely surrounded by floodwater with access routes submerged during flood events. This poses a serious safety risk both to residents and emergency responders to and from the site in a flood event, with personal safety being a requirement of PPS 7QD1. The assessment wrongly isolates the dwelling from the rest of the development. It is a clear example of piecemeal assessment. The garden and driveway and house function as a single unit. FLD1 applies to the entire red lined boundary, not just the footprint of the dwelling. It should be assessed as a whole. The office report also refers to considerations, with one being to prevent land raising. Relying on conditions in high risk flood areas is wholly inadequate. Enforcement action takes time. For example, the altering of ground levels on the floodplain just 2 fields upstream from this site in 2015 resulted in an enforcement notice being issued in 2018, and 7 years on, it is still live. The impact of altering the ground levels at that site wasn't apparent until the 2017 flood, and by that stage, the damage was done. That is why the policy approach is clear: avoidance, not post-permission mitigation. At 25.5 of the planning policy in the LDP, it states the Council will adopt a precautionary approach to development in flood risk areas, and goes on to say the most effective way to manage flood risk is to avoid that risk by locating new buildings and infrastructure outside the flood risk area. To conclude, this development offends planning policy in the LDP, the regional strategic planning policy, and fails to take a precautionary approach. The development site, as illustrated by the red line, is within the climate change floodplain. It fails to meet the exception test. Reliance on conditions to mitigate flood risk is not sufficient. It offends PPS 7QD1 with regards to personal safety. Granting permission will negatively impact on the flood alleviation scheme for the village. Setting aside requirements of robust planning policy sets a dangerous precedent. The planning process must uphold policy to protect the community from future flood risk. I urge the committee to refuse this application. Thank you for your time, and sorry for rushing that.
Thank you, Gillian. If you just like to hold there, I'll invite members of the committee if anyone has any questions they'd like to put to Gillian? If not, we can move on. No one in the chamber and no one online. Gillian, thank you for your time for now. If you just like to hold there, I will now invite forward the agent, Joe McGuinness. Joe, if you could just take a seat down in front of us here. The microphones in the chamber tend to work better when you're sitting down there. Thank you, Joe. Take your time. And again, you've got 5 minutes.
Chair, members and officers, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. In relation to the draft flood alleviation plans for the area, as pointed out in the Rivers response, there currently are no confirmed proposals, and that it's my view that the plans for flood alleviation and the locality to the site are no more than a dotted line on a map. This line requires alteration already, given that the Church Hall development next to my proposal is largely complete. So that's a brand new Church Hall building, which is largely completed. So there's a minor alteration to that. And I suppose I don't believe that any future alleviation plans, when they do come into play, would be restricted. And that I, in fact, can accommodate them. And as I pointed out the last day, I'd be more than willing to help out with that in terms of the wider solution for the village and for anything around the piece of land and the proposal for a home that I have myself. So I suppose, as far as I understand, flood alleviation plans are not dealt with through compulsory purchase, but they're dealt with through agreement with landowners. And being a landowner that has an interest in the area, I would obviously have an interest in improving the flood alleviation in the village, coming from the locality, as I pointed out the last time I spoke, and also given that I want to have my family home here. So I would want to help from a practical perspective, but also believe that I can do something more in the absence of DFI plans or funding being in place. Yeah, sorry, give me a second here. That would obviously be subject to necessary consents, and that would be appropriate to what is required in due course. I suppose it's disappointing that the attempts to put these points across to objectors to date have been rebuffed. I offered to meet objectors individually as a group and through a public meeting that I had held. All of these options were refused, and I'm struggling to understand why, if they want to actually solve the challenges with flooding in Eglinton, that they wouldn't take up this offer or numerous offers. And I would suggest that those options are still open to them, regardless of what happens today. It's obviously frustrating that, given the amount of time that's been put in by all parties, that it's taken this long to get this far. But given the most recent response from Rivers, the 7th consultation, and the extremely detailed process that officers have pursued, I'd like to think that proper judgment will be taken by the officers today. And I would thank everybody for their input to date. And as I say, I remain open to assisting in any other way I can going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGuinness. Members, anyone got any questions for Mr. McGuinness? Anyone online? Nope. Just sit tight where you are, anyway, sure, and we'll take it from here. Okay. Okay, members. Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Malachy? Right. So No questions from Maliki either. So members, there's a recommendation on the papers here. It's a recommendation for approval from the planning team. So I'm going to open it up to yourselves for a decision on that, or proposals or contrary proposals if you so wish. So again, over to yourselves.
Chair, can I come on?
Certainly, Councillor Gallagher, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, on the back of that, what we've heard, I'd like to propose we accept the officer's recommendation. I think that this is very detailed report, and that there's many mitigation factors that are in this, 19, I think, in total. So I think that we should go with the recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gallagher. So members, a proposal from Councillor Gallagher to accept a recommendation for an approval. Do we have a seconder on that? Councillor Jackson, go ahead.
Good Chair, and I suppose, and thanks to Maliki for the very comprehensive report. And this is the second time that this application's been in front of the committee, and there was concern raised at the last committee around the flood alleviation scheme, and queries. And I know personally I wasn't in a position to take a decision the last time because we didn't have the information and around the flood alleviation scheme. I appreciate the response that we've received from DFI Rivers, and whilst still isn't absolutely clear, but what is clear is that there's certainly there's not enough information or evidence that would sustain a refusal reason in relation to this application on those grounds. So on that basis, I'm content to second the proposal from Councillor Gallagher. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Alderman McMorris.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me in. And we are also supportive of that recommendation, although we basically, the 19 conditions on it, there needs to be strict adherence to them conditions. And I can only urge the applicant and the agent to keep pursuing, about the flood alleviation and whatever he's willing to put into it, because it is a major concern for the residents in that area. So, but we're happy to support.
Thank you, Alderman McMorris. Councillor Riley.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And like others, I've heard the presentation at the previous occasion, and then the recommendation on that day for it to be taken away and given some additional thought, and welcome the work that's been done since then to today. I thank Maliki for the comprehensive outlining of the additional conditions that are on the recommendation here. It does strike me as useful, the comments made by the applicant this afternoon in relation to recognising the importance of the flood amelioration issues, and the views of the Rivers Agency in relation to the work that still needs to be done on that issue for the people who live there. So while understanding and listening to those that have objected to it, including the Speaker this afternoon, I think that the list of conditions that are here is such that there isn't grounds for a refusal. And that's why I'm happy with the recommendation by Councillor Gallagher. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Fleming.
Thank you, Chair. I had my reservations the first time this came to committee. I still have reservations today. I understand that it's been recommended for approval today, but I cannot support this application. I'll be abstaining today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. I don't see anyone else wishing to make any further comment in relation to this. Obviously, Councillor Fleming has indicated that he would wish to abstain. So on the back of that, I suggest we put it to the vote. Suzanne, if we can.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Members, this is a vote for planning application LA 11 2023 220 2270F, and the proposal is to approve. Alderman Keith Kerrigan,
For Suzanne.
Alderman Neri McMorris,
Or
Janice Montgomery has declared an interest. Councillor John Boyle,
Or,
Councillor Caroline Devine, Councillor Sean Fleming,
Abstain.
Councillor Paul Gallagher,
For.
Councillor Conor Heaney,
Ah.
Councillor Christopher Jackson, Councillor Fergal Leonard,
No.
Councillor Patricia Logue,
Abstain as I wasn't here for the full application. Thank you.
Councillor Patrick Murphy,
uh,
Councillor Martin Riley,
Or.
and Councillor Seymour Barr is not here. Okay.
okay, members, that proposal has passed with 10 for it and 2 abstentions. So appreciate all the time that everyone took and the speakers that took the time to come here. So that's an approval from the Planning Committee of Derry City and Strabane District Council. And we will now move on to item number 4 in your packs, members, which is LA 11 2024 0058 F.
Chair, can I let Janice in just before you start?
Sorry, Alderman McMorris, can you speak up a little bit?
Can I let Janice in just before you start the next application?
That's absolutely fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Alderman. You're very welcome back, Alderman Montgomery. Okay, hope it wasn't too cold out there. Okay, members, we'll move on to again 4 in your pack, which is LA 11 2024 0058 F. And again, Laura, I believe, is going to walk us through this one. Laura, yeah? Okay, take it away.
Good afternoon, members. Application LA 11 2024 0058 F is an application for the retention of change of use from a single family house to a house in multiple occupations, a 5-bed at 11 Aberfoyle Terrace in Derry, and the recommendation is to refuse. So this is the application site as outlined in red, and here we have some photos of the application site. As indicated there, it's located at 11 Aberfoyle Terrace, which is located within the development limit of Derry, the central area and McGee Conservation Area. As you can see, it comprises of a 3-storey mid-terrace Victorian dwelling, and it's grade B1 listed. It's finished in red brick, and the principal elevation faces onto the main road there. So this is the elevations and floor plans and the drawings that were submitted with the planning application. The dwelling's set behind a small brick wall, and it's located within a terraced row of 17 houses of similar type on the west side of the road. So this is the policy context as set out in the planning report. So obviously, members are aware that we're following the planning committee there on the 4th of June. The agreement was made that we will proceed to formally adopt the LDP plan strategy. So as we're in a transitional period, which will operate until the policy is formally adopted. So here we have a list of all the policies, which include the LDP plan strategy alongside the Derry area plan and the plan and policy statements. So in terms of consultations, we had consulted environmental health and HE, given that this is a listed building, and environmental health have no objections, and they informed the submission of some amendments. HED are also content with the proposal. In terms of representations, we had no letters of support or objection received with regards to this planning application. So here, in terms of the policy consideration, So the Derry area plan as it stands has no policy in relation to HMOs, and there are no regional or subject plan policies on HMO development for the district and the council area. And so the current draft plan strategy provides new policy on HMOs, which will be afforded determining weight. And in this transitional period, as you will see from the planning report, the policies of the Derry area plan, along with the other SPPSs and the conservation area guidance, have also been considered. So here, in terms of the draft plan strategy policy, how 13 is relevant to consideration of this application for a HMO. So as outlined in the planning report, just to give you an indication of the properties on the street, number 3 and 5 Aberfoyle Terrace were formerly a health centre and they were granted permission for a HMO. Then there are remaining 15 properties in Aberfoyle Terrace, of 11 of which are operating as HMOs. And there is a breakdown just in terms of how they're operating as HMOs. This is also outlined in the planning report. So overall, when we look at all those figures, it works out that 73% of the properties in Aberfoyle Terrace are HMOs, thereby already significantly exceeding the 30% limit, which is outlined in policy how 13. So therefore, in consideration of that, as it's over 30%, the application fails to meet policy House 13, and that the introduction of this HMO would significantly impact on the character of surrounding area due to the over-concentration of HMOs in Aberfoyle Terrace. So the next relevant policy in the plan strategy is policy House 14, which is also specific to HMOs, and that policy requires that all the criteria are met. So this application, as detailed in the description, is for the change of use from a dwelling to a HMO with 5 bedrooms. The first criterion of policy HOU 14 is that the proposed unit shouldn't exceed 4 bedrooms. So therefore the proposal fails to meet that first criteria as it exceeds 4 bedrooms, which would have a detrimental impact on the character of the area. The floor space of the property exceeds 150 square metres. The layout of the proposal is considered acceptable for the future occupants, and none of the units are located wholly in the rear of the property. Just in terms of the final consideration of that policy, the retention and change of use of the property, as detailed previously, would take 73% of the properties operating as HMOs along the terrace. And the proposal therefore would detract from the established residential character of the area. That policy goes on to say where there's exceptional local need has been demonstrated, it can be justified. However, in this instance, no exceptional local need has been demonstrated to justify permitting a 5-bedroom HMO at this location. And then overall, the proposal is considered contrary to policy House 14. Just to go on then in terms of all the other policy considerations, in terms of GD Pol 1 and GD Pol 2, the proposal is considered to comply with the criteria that are set out in those policies. In terms of parking, the site's located in Zone B. It's acknowledged that on-street parking is limited at certain times. However, the level of parking required wouldn't be significantly different from that required if the property was retained as a dwelling, given that there's no increase there, and the site's located was in walking distance as well of amenities such as the bus station, main shopping areas in the city centre, given the proximity of the site to those places. And then furthermore, during off-peak hours, there'd be adequate provision for parking in nearby streets to accommodate the proposal. So having considered the above in terms of the LDP and the existing plan of policy statements, it's considered that the proposal complies with AMP 7 and PPS 3, TR 5 of the Derry area plan, and TAM 9 of the draft plan. So in terms of built heritage conservation area, as outlined earlier, the application, the proposed dwelling is a listed building and it's located within the conservation area. It's grade B1 listed. So there's no external amendments proposed other than the reinstatement of the sliding sash windows. It's considered that it will retain its uniformity with the buildings in the row. As I said, HED have been consulted and are now content with the proposal. So in terms of the alterations to the listed building, it's not considered that there will be any harm to number 11 Aberfoyle Terrace. And the proposal therefore is considered to comply with policy HE4 of the draft plan strategy. And so far as it relates to the alterations to the listed building and policy BH8 of PPS 6. And also in terms of the conservation area guidance and the policy is set out in HE5 of the draft plan strategy. In terms of the setting of the listed building, as outlined previously and in the planning report, the change of the use of this listed building is up to a HMO is considered contrary to House 13, and that it would harm the character of the residential area. And therefore it's considered to harm the character of the listed building as it would contribute to more than 30% of the properties on the street operating as HMOs. And in respect of House 14, the proposed change of use will exceed 4 bedrooms. So the proposal is considered to fail to comply with policy HE4 of the draft plan strategy as the nature of the proposed use fails to respect the character of the setting of the listed building. And also it fails to comply with policy BH7 and criterion C of policy BH11 of PPS 6 that the nature of the change of use proposed doesn't respect the established residential character of the area. So just to summarise, in terms of policy House 13, the proposed development exceeds the 30% threshold as set out in that policy, as 73% of the properties in Aberfoyle Terrace are operating as HMOs. The proposal is contrary to policy House 14 and that the proposed development exceeds 4 bedrooms, which is contrary to the first criteria of that policy. And the proposal is contrary to the SPPS and policy BH11, BH7 and PPS 6 and policy HE4 as the change of use will detrimentally impact on the character and the setting of the listed building at this location. We also received some late information which has been circulated to members just in terms of that. So the planning history and the planning report referred specifically to the application site and to the site adjacent. But the consideration of that property in terms of the HMO use has also been set out in the planning report and acknowledged in the House 13 consideration of the planning report. So officers are content that that's been discussed and being considered. So overall, the recommendation is to refuse this application for the reasons which are set out in the planning report. And just to note there in terms of refusal reason 2, there was an amendment made to that refusal reason and just there in terms of the ending of it, in terms of the effect that it will have in residential amenity. So that'll differ a wee bit from that set out in the report to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, we have a couple of speakers here as well. Members, can I invite forward first to address the committee, Councillor Enelis? Very welcome, Grace. You're no stranger to these shores. Again, take your time.
John, I missed you all too much. I have to come back and get speaking rights. Okay, sorry, just get this up here. Okay, so I'm here today to ask you to give considerable weight to the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. As a councillor for Foyleside, I'm contacted weekly, sometimes daily, by concerned residents whose communities have been impacted by the saturation of HMOs. The impact of this uncontrolled development has resonated with us. And so through the development of the LDP, we have been very mindful of the need for the introduction of a HMO policy, which will protect the residential areas. With the proposal of Planning Committee at the start of June to adopt the LDP, the HMO policy has now been given considerable weight, and Sinn Féin welcome this as a result of many years of work and a major step towards the protection of residents. The draft plan strategy was published over 5 years ago now. So although this application was submitted previously, the intentions of our council have been clear for a number of years before this. The HMO policy, namely in this case HOU 13 and HOU 14, is reflected in the officer's recommendations for refusal today, and I would ask you to uphold these. Garmagov.
Thank you. As you all know, members, there's not an opportunity to put any questions to Councillor Neelis, but thank you for coming along and letting us know what your view is on that. Can I now invite forward the applicant, Mr. Steve Bradley? And again, Steve, similar thing, take your time and we'll work our way through it. You've got 5 minutes from whenever you get going.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. This application has been in the planning system now for 73 weeks, 73. In that time, there hasn't been a single objection submitted by anybody, not by residents, not by elected members. An application 3 doors up was submitted just 2 days before this one, and it was given permission over 6 months ago, despite being a larger and a more complex application. So what was the difference? The short answer is this application has been severely and materially disadvantaged by the staffing problems in the Council's planning department, and I'll explain why. This application has had 5 different case officers in the last 18 months. Of those, only 2, and I'm very grateful to them, managed to progress this application at all. Because of this, there were significant, literally months, when absolutely nothing was being done on this application. That's very clear from the timeline on the planning website. So the only way this application falls foul in planning terms is in relation to the incoming LDP and its restrictions on HMOs. So the significant delays caused by staffing have effectively pushed this application into a completely different policy environment and therefore led to altered recommendations from officers. Had it not been materially disadvantaged in this way, surely it would have been approved just like number 3 and 5, which was submitted at the same time. Now, looking at the report itself, the grounds given for refusal on the HOU 13 don't stack up, in my view. Firstly, the report takes a very narrow definition of the area to measure for HMOs. Aberfoyle Terrace is not an isolated entity. It's clearly part and parcel of Strand Road, and in particular the row, which stretches from Rock Road to Lawrence Hill. I would assert that that would be a more credible area for calculating the relevant percentage of HMOs. Secondly, the report claims 11 of the 17 properties on a terrace are HMOs, and I'm afraid that is technically and legally incorrect, because properties which don't meet the rules for being a HMO should not be counted as HMOs. The 2016 Housing Multiple Occupation Act has a very clear statutory requirement. All HMOs must have a licence. The report lists that 2 of the properties on this terrace have planning permission to be a HMO, but do not have a licence. And as stated, the legislation is very clear. Now, those properties may never actually be run or licensed as HMOs. I know one of them currently operates as a B&B. So they don't meet the legal definition and requirements of a HMO. And more notably, the report states that a further 6 properties on Aberfoyle Terrace have neither planning permission nor certificate of lawful usage to be HMOs, yet they're still being counted as so. And I would ask, how can they be? Officers have no idea if those properties meet the criteria for established use. I can think of one which in the last few years ran as a B&B, so clearly wouldn't meet the requirement to get a CLUD. A property is either meeting the requirements and classification of a HMO or it isn't. Officers can't assign a class usage to a property where no attempt has been made to gain that usage. I mean, this is extremely dangerous stuff, Committee, because the Council is effectively surrendering its control over the planning process by recognising usages which haven't been applied for, haven't been gained, and haven't been proven. Why would anybody bother with planning permission if they can do what they want without it and the Council just nods along? Now, the property in this application did run as a HMO without planning permission before I bought it, and sadly, this experience just says I should have kept my head down, got it licensed, and operated it as an unofficial HMO without the hassle of planning, because that's what half the rest of the other street is, the other rest of the street is doing. Where is the incentive here for people to do the right thing and play by the rules? It's also worth noting that in the officer's report for 3 and 5 Aberfoyle Terrace, which was only written 6 months ago, they said there were only 5 HMOs on Aberfoyle Terrace because they discounted the 6 that don't have planning permission. Yet in this report, they're counting them. The situation should be simple. A property can only be counted and considered a HMO when it has that legally required status. Of that, only 3 of the 17 properties on the street have both planning permission and a licence to run as a HMO. Only 5 have planning permission to be a HMO. I would suggest those are the figures that should be used to calculate the percentage of HMOs, and not the illegal ones, and by so doing it would meet the threshold. Now, colleagues, this property is currently a derelict and uninhabitable shell. No heating, no water, no kitchen. It was like that when I bought it, as the previous owner had abandoned the refurbishment of it. The windows have been changed by previous owner as well, and as soon as HED said they wanted traditional windows put back, I agreed without hesitation, and it's going to cost me £20,000 to do so. And this is despite the fact 5 other properties on the terrace also have PVC windows, and the council is doing nothing about that. So this application will reverse heritage damage, positively enhance the listed building, and improve the character of the street. So to conclude, the committee members, the overriding question for you today is this: what harm would be caused in planning terms if you approve this application? And I would argue the answer is realistically none. This makes a positive planning contribution, bringing a derelict, unlivable property back into use and reversing heritage damage. It doesn't detract from the residential character of a street, which the officers say is already majority HMO. So how can it detract from the established character? The established character of this street, according to officers, is already HMOs. And most importantly, when HMOs are a big issue in the city, not a single person or a single councillor has objected to this application. This building has to be used for something. It's basically surrounded by the university ever since Tiverkey was bought by UU. It is essentially in McGee campus. And I honestly think it's unrealistic to expect that families will want a large 3-storey house with no outside space on a very busy road, completely surrounded by a student campus. Yet it has to be used for something. So to finalise, the 5 student rooms in this application, the need is for them there. If you refuse this application, that need will still exist. It will just be transferred to somewhere else in the city where, unlike this, it will be much more contentious. The LDP is not adopted. You can set aside the requirements in it when you feel there's justification to do so. And as outlined, I genuinely think there are very clear justifications, both in terms of the material disadvantage and in terms of the counting of unofficial HMOs to do so. And I would please urge you to approve it. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. And thank you to the various members of staff, officers for their help with the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley, and thank you for your time, and thanks for coming in. If you can sit tight for a second. So members, again, I'll open it up to yourselves if anybody has any questions for Mr. Bradley. One in the chamber, no one online that I can see, Mr. Bradley. But again, thank you for your time and obviously a very impassioned commentary around this. So members, if we can move on now. Has anybody got any questions for Laura or indeed any member of the officer team in relation to this application? Obviously, it's recommended for a refusal. I'll open it up to yourselves again. Alderman McMorris.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. And just for my own purpose, can I ask a question that's not particularly related to this here? In regards to the LDP, I was under the illusion that, all of the rooms needed toilet facilities or whatever. Can you confirm what that is? And also, can I just ask, in regards to the 30%, and I know he's saying it basically, that's, I don't know what he's saying, but basically he's saying that, it's already HMO related anyway, the street. But I just wanted to find out if the LDP is adopted and put through in full council, at what stage are we going to outline the boundaries for the 30% and the 10%? I think that's really, really relevant for to make informed decisions and basically give, I suppose, the residents in these areas I suppose, a level of security in regards to, you know, what they could be expecting going forward or whatever. So I was just looking at a wee bit of clarity and around that, just to make sure, you know, that is it 73% or is there some ambiguity around that? What's the legal status in regards to that? And I know he was making some kind of accusations that it was illegal, but can we get some kind of legal clarity on that?
So your first question was to officers in relation to this particular application, Alderman McMorris, yes?
First one was around the bathroom
The
and
bathrooms.
yeah, and that's just a general
Pieces, I'm sure.
piece of
Your officer
information.
can answer that.
Just clarity.
And then in relation to your second query, in relation to the LDP and the LPP,
Yeah.
City Solicitor, take that one, but Suzanne or Laura, whoever.
Yeah, so the HMO needs to have its own separate facilities. So the HMO is the one residential unit. Okay, so it needs to have a bathroom, it needs to have its own kitchen facilities, which this would have.
Sorry, thank you for that, because I missed some of the training and just wanted clarity on around that.
So just in terms of the second question, if you don't mind, Alderman McMorris will deal with that question, save it for later in the meeting, because we have to deal with this application on the basis of what is currently in front of us and what the policies currently are in front of us, and what is in front of us at the minute in terms of the LDP is 30%.
Content? Yep, thank you. Anyone else? Questions for officers? Hang on. I'm sorry, we can't have commentary from the gallery, I'm afraid. Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, members, well, there is a recommendation in front of you. The recommendation is for refusal. Councillor Jackson.
Good Chair, and thanks to Laura for the report. I would agree with quite a lot of what Steve said or the applicant said when he came in. The residential character of this area has been eroded over time, and Chair, you would know that yourself, and it's because of the lack of a HMO policy. I think it's absolutely disgraceful that any streets in our city centre or any street within our city and district could get anywhere near 70% non-residential use, or HMO. That's disgraceful, and that needs to stop. This practice needs to stop. There needs to be controls in place, and I don't think that the argument is strong enough to say that the residential character, or because the controls haven't been in place up until now, then we should ignore the needs of the existing residents in that street. So I'm glad to see this come forward as a refusal. I'm glad to see that the new draft plan strategy is putting some protections in place to prevent streets becoming dominated by HMOs. So on that basis, I'm more than happy to propose the recommendation to refuse. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And another, sorry, Councillor Logue, Alderman McMorris had already indicated to come in. Go ahead, Alderman.
Thanks, Chairman McMillan. Can I just say to all the officers for the time and effort that they put into the packs, but I'm happy to second the proposal. I think it is discussing that we're at a level of 73%. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman McMorris, and you're okay now, Councillor Logue. Okay, thank you. Okay, members, well, there's a proposal here, and the recommendation is to refuse, proposed by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Alderman McMorris. I haven't heard any dissension in relation to that. Is it going to require a vote, or are we all unanimous in support of the proposal? I think that's a yes. Okay. Okay, and there's no one online saying anything different, so thank you. So the proposal and the refusal is carried. Thank you, members. Okay, members, and again, moving on to the next item, which is item number 5, again relating to the same property. And again, I will invite Laura to present to the committee. So Laura, whenever you're ready.
Yes, members, application LA11 2024-0082 LBC is a listed building consent for the application previously presented there for the retention of the change of use from single family house to a house in multiple occupation 5-bed at 11 Aberfoyle Terrace in Derry with a recommendation to refuse consent. Again, this is just a site location plan as outlined previously. The application site's at 11 Aberfoyle Terrace. It's located within the Development Limited Derry, the Central Area and McGee Conservation Area. This is a 3-storey mid-terrace Victorian building, which is grade B1 listed. It's finished in red brick and principal elevations onto the main road there. Again, this is the drawings submitted with the planning application, the elevations and the floor plans. In terms of the policy context, as set out previously, so this application is considered in the context of the LDP plan strategy alongside the existing area plan and plan and policy statements, given that we're in a transitional period. In terms of consultation responses, HED were consulted on this application, given that the application relates to listed building consent, with the change here being the reinstatement of the sliding sash windows. HED are now content with the proposal and don't have any objections. We haven't had any letters of support or objection with regards to this listed building consent application. This application, the application buildings grade B1 listed, and changes to the exterior are limited to those for the sliding sash windows, which HED welcome and are content with, and no internal changes are proposed. So they're just in terms of the impact of the listed building. There'd be no objections from HED in that respect, and the proposal would comply with policy. Therefore, however, in terms of the development affecting the setting of the listed building, as outlined in the planning report, the proposal is contrary to policies how 13 and 14 of the draft plan strategy. And then therefore it's considered that listed building consent can't be granted in isolation. So the change of use is contrary to policy house 13, and that would harm the established character of the area, as there would be more than 30% of properties operating as a HMO. And also in terms of how 14, the change of use would exceed 4 bedrooms, detracting from the established character of the area. As outlined in the planning report, officers are, have outlined that whilst the physical works of the listed building are considered acceptable, the use is not acceptable and would detrimentally impact on the character of the street and consequently the character of the listed building, contrary to policy HE4. So this listed building consent is linked to the full planning application, which has been recommended refusal, and therefore it's also recommended for refusal. So just to summarise there, the change of use of the listed building is not considered acceptable in terms of policies how 13 and how 14 of the draft plan strategy. The physical works to the building are considered acceptable in terms of the listed building itself. But as this proposal is linked to the full application, it is also recommended refusal for the reason which is set out in the planning report. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Obviously that was Appendix 5. I do have on my list Mr. Bradley to come forward and speak to the committee again, but I note They may well have departed our company. So I have to give him the fair chance of calling him forward. So if someone could perhaps take a step outside to see if he's in the corridor. Okay, no sign of Mr. Bradley. Okay. Members, then the next format, any questions for the officer team, Laura in particular? And if not, then there's a recommendation in front of you. And again, it's for a refusal. So I'd open it up to you, that. Open to the floor. Alderman McMorris.
I'm happy to go with the officer's recommendation for refusal for the reasons stated. Thanks.
And I'll second that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alderman McMorris. Thank you, Councillor Logue. So that's proposed and seconded by Alderman McMorris and Councillor Logue. There were a couple of other nods coming my way for a seconder on that as well. So anyway, you were first on, Councillor Logue, so thank you. Members, it's open to yourselves. I haven't heard any dissension in the ranks in relation to that proposal. Is there anybody that doesn't agree with the recommendation to refuse? No. Okay, that's unanimous again. Thank you, members. Okay, members, we'll move along to Appendix 6, as per our agreement at the start of the meeting, and that is LA 11 2024 0627 /O. And again, Laura, you're having a bit of a day today, so over to you again.
Thank you. Application LA11 2024 0627 this is an outline planning application for a site for an infill dwelling, and it's located at lands adjacent to the southeast of 24A Curryfree Road, and the recommendation is to refuse. So this is the application site outlined in red here, and the site location plan, and there's an aerial image as well, just outlining the application site. So as you can see, it's agricultural land, and it comprises mostly of a small field with a part of the adjoining field to the southeast. It's located on the eastern side of a laneway which serves 3 dwellings there at 24A, 24B and 24C Curryfree Road, and it's located adjacent to number 24A Curryfree Road and on the opposite side of the laneway from 24B. So this is a photograph of the application site. As you can see, the land within the field rises slightly there in a northeasterly direction. It's enclosed by a 1 metre high timber ranch style fence along the western boundary and a post and wire fence along the southern and southeastern boundaries. And there is a mature leyland hedge along the northwestern boundary with the dwelling there, 24A. There's also a water course which runs parallel to the northern boundary of the field, which is defined by some trees and a wee bush. So the dwellings at 24A, 24B and 24C Curryfree Road are all detached bungalows with single-storey detached garages, and the site is located amongst these and within the rural area, approximately 2.5 kilometres southeast of New Buildings and approximately 4 kilometres southwest of Ardmore. Again, so this is the policy context, and given the current situation, we're in a transitional period. This proposal has been assessed against the planning policy statements and the area plan alongside the draft plan strategy. In terms of consultation responses, there's been a number of consultees following some submissions. None of the consultees have any objections to the proposal and have proposed standard planning conditions and have provided advice. We haven't had any letters of support or objection received regarding this application. So in terms of consideration of this proposal, as I outlined previously, it's been assessed under the plan of policy statements, which would the relevant one being PPS 21, and the policy within that is CTY8 ribbon development. So this policy states that permission will be refused for a building which creates or adds to ribbon development. So officers consider that a dwelling on the site will be visually linked and would form a ribbon with the dwellings at 24A and 24C, which would create a ribbon of development, and therefore that engages consideration of the exception within CTY8, which allows the development of a small gap site. Then just to go on in terms of policy CTY8, so that gap site is detailed to be sufficient to accommodate a maximum of 2 houses within an otherwise substantial and continuously built up frontage, which comprises a line of 3 or more buildings along the road frontage. So there are only 2 dwellings on this side of the lane, therefore there's no substantial and continuously built up frontage. The garages are small ancillary domestic garages, and they're within the curtilage of the dwellings, and they don't have a separate frontage onto the lane, and they're only visible from the entrance to those dwellings, and wouldn't read with any of the development on the application site or in the adjoining field. Again, this just is some images again of the application site, which demonstrates that. Here you can see 24C. You can also see 24A, but you don't read any of those ancillary buildings as having a frontage onto the road. Just then, and further consideration of CTY8, so the site in itself can't be considered a gap, given that there's no development to the immediate south of the site, which is required by the policy. The field below the application site to the south provides a further gap and a visual break between the application site and the dwelling at 24C Curryfree Road. So the application is only for one dwelling on half of the gap which exists between the existing 2 dwellings, and is not for the development of the entire gap, which is stipulated as an exception in CTY8. So we don't have an application for a dwelling on site 2, which has been indicated on an illustrative plan submitted by the agent. So therefore the proposal is contrary to CTY8 in that respect. So then, as stated, the proposal has to be considered under policy How 23 of the draft plan strategy. So this is a stricter test whenever it comes to considering full dwellings. So this policy allows for a single dwelling in a small gap and an existing built-up frontage, and that policy specifies that the site is sufficient only to accommodate a maximum of 1 dwelling within an otherwise substantial and continuously built-up frontage, and it defines that frontage as being a line of 5 or more dwellings in a row. So clearly, this application doesn't comply with that policy. There's only 2 dwellings along here with the frontage onto the road. So there aren't 5 as required by the policy. And this policy also only allows for the development of a small gap to accommodate 1 dwelling, and clearly the application site and the remainder of the field could accommodate more than 1 dwelling. So the proposal is contrary to policy How 23. So just to summarise, the development would, in terms of CTY8, create a ribbon of development and engages consideration of the exception. However, there's no substantial and continuously built up frontage. As there's no development immediately south of the application site, the remainder of the field provides a visual gap and a break between the application site and the dwelling at 24C Curryfree Road. And the proposed development is not a small infill or gap site which could accommodate 1 house within a row of 5 or more dwellings, which is contrary to policy How 23 of the LDP draft plan strategy, which carries determining weight. In terms of CTY1, the development doesn't meet any of the cases outlined in CTY1 of PPS 21, which would be permitted in the countryside, and there are no overriding reasons have been demonstrated to justify why this development is essential in this location. So the proposal is also contrary to policy CTY1 of PPS 21. So therefore, overall, in terms of both of those policy assessments, the proposal is not acceptable in principle. As always, we've considered this proposal in terms of the remaining policies as set out in PPS 21 and the draft plan strategy. So as we have assessed, the proposal would create a ribbon of development and it would result in a suburban style build-up of development, which would be contrary to policy CTY 8 and CTY 14 of PPS 21 and policy CTY 2 of the draft plan strategy. However, we consider that a modest dwelling wouldn't be unduly prominent and could visually integrate into the landscape. And if approved, detailed design could be considered at reserve matter stage. In terms of amenity and human health, there aren't any issues. There's sufficient separation distance between the application site and the adjoining dwellings where amenity could be protected, and there's no adverse impacts in terms of noise, air pollution, dust or odours envisaged, and there are no contaminated land within proximity of the application site. In terms of transport and movement, there's a new access proposed on the laneway, and visibility displays have been determined by DFI Roads and indicated on the drawings, and they have no objection to the proposal. In terms of flood risk, the site's not within a floodplain or inundation area. There is a small area of surface water flooding at the north of the site, but the application wouldn't require drainage assessment. Surface water shall be disposed of by a soakaway, and nearby water courses can be maintained from the adjoining lands, and works for the installation of the discharge for the package treatment plant and the water course is considered acceptable. In terms of the natural environment, there's no significant issues. There's been no signs of protected species recorded by the ecologist. There is vegetation to be removed for displays, but it's considered to be of little ecological value and will be compensated by new planting. The sewage will be treated by a package treatment plant and will require the appropriate consent. NIA and SES didn't have any objections to the proposal. So overall, the proposal's compliant in consideration of natural heritage. So just to summarise, in terms of the draft plan strategy, the site is not, the proposal is not development of a small infill or gap site sufficient to accommodate one house within an otherwise substantial and continuously built up frontage, and doesn't meet the requirements therefore of policy HOW 23. And this proposal now, and this policy now carries determining weight. In terms of PPS 21, the proposal would create a ribbon of development along existing laneway and result in a suburban style build-up of development, which is contrary to the SPPS and PPS 21 policy CTY 8 and 14 and policy CTY 2 of the draft plan strategy. The proposal is not the development of a small gap site within an otherwise substantial and continuously built up frontage and doesn't meet the exception outlined in policy CTY 8. And in terms of CTY 1, the proposal does not meet any case where an individual dwelling house will be granted and no overriding reasons have been demonstrated. So overall, refusal is recommended for the reasons as set out in the planning report.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, members, I have online the agent for this application, Lee Kennedy, who is known to us very well by this stage, Lee. So you're very welcome to the committee, and you know the drill at this point. You have 5 minutes to present to the committee, and I'll open that up to you. Take a time, just get started whenever you're comfortable.
No problem. Thank you very much, Chair and members, for the opportunity to address the committee on this planning application. I reviewed the committee report and wish to advance 3 key points in support of approving this application today. 1. The emerging draft plan strategy. Officers have placed determining weight on the emerging draft plan strategy, which I respectfully suggest is not appropriate at this stage. As clearly noted in the committee report by officers, paragraph 1.1 of the strategic planning policy statement makes it very clear that during traditional or transitional periods, existing regional policies and PPSs must be applied. We're still within this transitional period. The new LDP has not been formally adopted yet. When final approval is due later this month, technically it has not been completed in terms of a statutory adoption process. Therefore, I feel PPS 21 still remains in full effect and carries substantial weight in the determination of this planning application. Interestingly, at the LDP committee meeting earlier this month, I noted officers confirmed that once the LDP was fully adopted, its policies would be applied to all planning applications, irrespective of when they were submitted to the planning system. To refuse this application at this stage based on a draft policy not fully adopted would amount to a premature adoption of the policy that has not been through the statutory requirement steps to date. Second point, compliance with PPS 21. The application has been brought forward as an infill site under policy CTY 8 of PPS 21. We respectively disagree with the planning officer's conclusion that there is no substantial or continuously built up frontage along this laneway. There are 3 existing dwellings on the laneway, number 24A, 24B and 24C. And importantly, substantial outbuildings at numbers 24A and 24C clearly front onto the lane and visually read as part of the overall bulk development. These are not small sheds or incidental structures. For example, the shed at Mr. Canning's house measures 33.5 feet by 23 feet long, roughly is the equivalent to a dwelling footprint. The outbuilding at number 24C is located on a visually prominent site, and this further reinforces the scent of build-up along this private laneway. The officers view these structures are not part of the overall frontage is a highly subjective opinion. These buildings are integral to the visual and physical bulk development pattern along this laneway. The resultant bulk form, including dwellings and substantial buildings, meets the test under policy CTY 8 of PPS 21, namely a line of 3 or more buildings, not dwellings, buildings along a road frontage. It is important to highlight that the policy allows the infilling of a gap site to accommodate up to a maximum of 2 houses only within a substantially built up frontage. Furthermore, it's clear from our illustrative layout plan set out in the committee report that the proposed gap site respects the existing pattern in terms of plot size, scale and siting, and is fully in keeping with the semi-rural character of this laneway. My third and final point is the applicant's personal circumstances. While the applicants are very private people, they would like it for me to briefly highlight their personal circumstances to the planning committee. They have lived at this address for nearly 40 years and have never previously sought to develop the field. However, their circumstances have now changed. They have a 25-year-old son. He has severe autism and learning difficulties, requires a high level of care and support while still living at home. They have a 32-year-old daughter who is married to a local man. They have 2 children, currently reside in Belfast and need to return home to support the needs of the family. The proposed site is intended for the daughter and her family to reintegrate into the local community while being on hand to provide care and practical support for her brother and her aging parents, both of whom are approaching retirement age. In conclusion, Chair, there are no objections to this application from any statutory consultee. There's no technical or environmental reasons for it to be refused. We believe this application complies with current policy, reflects a clear and justified personal need, and was result in a dwelling that integrates into the surrounding landscape without any effect on the environment whatsoever. We respectfully ask the committee to approve this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks for addressing the committee. Members, I'll open it up to yourselves if anybody has any questions for Mr. Kennedy. I don't see anyone in the chamber here. Lee, anybody online? Don't see anyone online, Lee, so you can sit tight for now. Okay, members, has anybody got any questions for Laura or indeed any other member of the planning team? And I don't see anybody online with any questions either. And no one in the chamber. So, members, There's a recommendation in front of you. The recommendation is for a refusal. Obviously, you've heard the officers, you've heard the agent for the applicant. So the recommendation there is to refuse, and I'll open it up to yourselves to make that decision. Councillor Devine.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to come in. I have looked at the report. I've listened to the presentation from Laura, so thanks for that, Laura, as well. I've looked at the photos in the pack and the plans that are presented in the pack. And I actually believe that there is a substantial and continuous built-up frontage. The report on page 111 says that the garages at 24A and 24C are small ancillary domestic buildings, and they're not considered to have separate frontage onto the laneway. But the PAC in an appeal in 2019 states that there's nothing in the policy to distinguish between in-curtilage buildings such as a garage and individual road frontage buildings on separate plots. And they upheld the decision that a garage was a building with a frontage to the road for the purposes of CTY 8. So if you consider this, then the garages can be taken into account as buildings. So there are then 4 buildings along that frontage. The report also says that there's only one site in the application. If you look at the diagrams, I think it's 6 and 7. There are 2 sites. There's a gap site there for 2 sites. I have seen a number of applications on the portal who have considered separate sites, and they have been approved. So looking at all of this, I think there is a gap site that can accommodate 2 houses, albeit this is for one application. The report agrees the development would respect the existing development pattern along the lane frontage in terms of size, scale, site and plot size. So I do believe that this application does meet the exception under CTY 8. And because of that, that would nullify the refusal reason 4 and also then 2 and 3. So I'm proposing, Chair, that we overturn the recommendation to refuse. And I know one of the refusal reasons is under the draft plan strategy. But given that 3 of those refusal reasons are under PPS 21, and we haven't fully adopted the draft plan strategy, that we wouldn't give it determined weight in this circumstance in the interim because we're in the transition period. And so I'm asking that we would overturn the decision to refuse and approve it under CTY 8.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Devine. That's a fairly comprehensive argument presented by members. Is anybody else, anything they want to add to it? City Solicitor, Lightning.
There are a couple of matters in relation to that, in respect of which I would like to have the opportunity to provide members with legal advice. That should obviously be done under in committee. Members are entitled to receive legal advice in committee. So if members were so minded to take this opportunity to go into confidential business, so as I can just provide some legal advice to the members.
Okay. So obviously the City Solicitor has requested that we go into confidential business. Is everyone content that we do that to receive that legal advice? Are you all content to do that? Yeah? Okay. Just going to have to ask other members of the public just to step outside for a few minutes. I don't think anybody's keeping any secrets, but we have to respect the wishes of the committee. Thank you.
I've just realised one of the consultees is the lock